Welcome, everyone. For the ones that you don't know me, my name is Platon Isaias. I'm the program director of Projective Cities MPhil in Architecture and Urban Design. We're extremely happy to have with us this evening Aristide Antonas, a great personal friend, but also friend of the AA and of our program. Aristides' lecture sits within a framework of what we call Athens virtual trip. This week, our program and our students and faculty have been engaged into a series of conversations, seminars and lectures about the city of Athens in Greece. We have done projects and we have a series of collaborations in that city as well as Barcelona. So this is the first trip of that kind this academic year. We are discussing, of course, not just Athens or Greece, but of course, urban and social, political, and architectural questions and problems that have emerged into the city during the years of economic crisis, but of course, even more recently due to the current pandemic. Any conversation about Athens should include Aristides' work for the city, but also the use of the city as a paradigm for a much wider conversations about architectural art practice and philosophy is essential and a reference for many of us in Greece, in Europe, and beyond. Today's lecture, Aristides, is titled The Law of Withdrawal, which I think is really clear of what it's supposed to discuss. Aristides' work spans in an area that includes philosophy, art, literature, and architecture. He publishes novels, short stories, theater scripts, and essays. His art and architectural work has been featured, among other places, in Documenta 14, in the Istanbul Biennale, the Venice Biennale, and had solo institutional presentations in the Swiss Architectural Museum, in Austria, in the Architectural Institute, and in the FRAC in Orleans. And he has a very active role also as an educator in multiple universities in Europe. So, Aristide, welcome. It's a great honor and happiness to have you with us this evening. The floor, the digital virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Platon. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation. It's always nice to be here, even if we don't know exactly what this means. And I don't know if it's immediately visible, but there is a back layer of in the title of this presentation that intends a reading of the work I have produced so far, let's say, Law of Withdrawal. To read again the production of the last years from the perspective of nowadays condition where I am delivering, let's say, this talk to you, not in the physical lecture room of the AA as I would wish, but in my room, still speaking to you, of course, but from an architectural standpoint, let's say, speaking also to nobody. So I'm addressing to you a monologue, and this is what the setting, at least, is telling us. The architectural scenography of speaking in this frame follows already a comment about the work I did, and this is how I want to start, maybe. Speaking about the so-called theory of the extended bed that I tried to develop in the studio here 2 years ago, the AA, but also in relation to which I entered in 2008, the still ongoing project, House for Doing Nothing, started then as an architectural comment on a fragment, theoretical fragment, text. In a way, my voice heard today maybe sounds more like announcing or declaring. It's a voice that may resemble today some radio announcements of war in the past. And it will reach you maybe from the heart of the House for Doing Nothing, if such a heart could ever exist. As underlying a condition I was trying to explain 1 decade ago. And it is clear that me as a ghost speaking to you, I am precisely settled in the normality of telepresence that also drove me also to the idea of urban protocols, working there together with Thanos and Zartaloudis and also Platon. In the frame of this telepresent normality, the idea of protocols could be settled in a way. And I tried to organize some possible energy then for exchange games and interplays described as protocols that could inhabit the new urban, while the new urban could be already seen as inhabiting the traditional public space by already undermining the reality of traditional presence. The elements of tele-distance were taking command, also out there in what was conceived as an exterior space of the city. And about the work on protocols then, the scenography of an exterior urban space was to be thought anew. And maybe this is the element that has to be pinpointed today as a most important part of this protocol work. As if what was called till today the real had to surrender to the common created out of a necessary distance, let's say. So not, of course, that we were wishing ever for this situation to take place in such a radical form so soon, not that we were wishing any of its preconditions to be visible, but we were already trying, together with Thanos and Platon and also other collaborators, to understand what the plasticity of legislation could include, and also what would be the literature, literary force of this legislative concept of architecture. So we created with Thanos these 5 protocols in order to somehow showcase the possibility of a micro legislation which would apply locally via the web in a visible level of the city. And this idea did not fall from the sky. We established it in the local frame. So in a continuation of an existing legal system, the one of Greece, and we thought about it as a set of operating routines that could establish themselves in the city life as works that could take place in the frame of the World Wide Web, but as works of legislative architecture. So in the beginning, we were thinking to reorder the civic code, but then we understood that the best way to go was to really operate via the web, that it gave us this possibility of a different treating of law and legislation. We were very fond of the narrative part of it, and we discussed the protocols as possible drastic literature texts containing this theatrical force. And they did not, the protocols did not fall from the sky. I was telling for one more reason, that there was an ever-growing status quo of an internet infrastructure that was functioning very well already in Greece. And we could also argue that even the traditional law setting in Greece was proved immediately much weaker than the omnipotent infrastructure of control flows during the period of the Greek crisis. It's also interesting to have this concept of locality expanding into time. It's not only place. It also concerns periods of time. So I think that this was an extremely interesting period for me, the so-called normality of bankrupted Greece. In the same way, today, the same infrastructure seems to reassure us for some continuity of a type of normality. So there were already protocols in the internet organizing the life inside and outside the households, stabilizing the normality of an everyday life. And the idea of protocols of withdrawal that are in the title today, even if it seems to refer to the condition of the pandemics, to the instruction of extra security and to a condition that somehow broke the norms of the cities, lead in this case of today's presentation, on the contrary, to a definition of the city's normality. The definition of the normality through withdrawal, pre-existing the pandemics, and addressing the period which will follow COVID-19. So furthermore, through an investigation about urban withdrawal, we orient ourselves towards a systematic theory of infrastructure. We're directed to an updated concept of infrastructure. Of course, we could speak a lot about its definition, but it absolutely certainly would include the realm of the post-digital extensions of it, becoming increasingly visible as a mechanism of a certain type of withdrawal. So the urban protocols we were thinking about, firstly in Athens and then in all different settings, could never exist without a molecular observation of concerning the pixel of the city structure. The modern city describing a space of withdrawal already. I will explain a bit this later, through infrastructure which connects the part to the whole. So I thought that the molecule of the city and its new urbanism had already to be re-examined under the specter of a new description of the room, the bed, and the area of the extended bed, an area of rest that includes a fictive movement over any material warehouse, let's say. I use sometimes this final scene of Citizen Kane that you can find everywhere. You can have a look at it where there is this kind of virtual fly over a warehouse. So an area, this cell, let's say, the urban cell that I was trying to describe, would have to allow this visit of a virtual warehouse, while it would also provide the rest and, of course, a cockpit or a kind of possibility of orientation machine for a selective move over this warehouse of the web. And somehow the immobility of the bed, the control panel, and the distant warehouse could describe already the transformed room, but also the transformed city. Urbanism, in this sense, will have, yes, I just give you some of the images to have an idea. So there was all these texts that were implying architectures, and so these are the 5 protocols and some examples related to them. And yes, urbanism in this sense will have not to form anymore a set of urban receptacles and apparatuses meant to encourage meetings and orient passages and threshold conditions in between given actions, but the actions themselves. So instead of having an architecture that we had to deal with a background of actions, we were dealing together with all the team that we were interested to all this operation to really think if we could intervene in a kind of layer that was a bit not so well accepted after Foucault, let's say, and all the concepts against legislation or against law, to find again the strength to reopen a closed narrative part of what the society could mean with legislation. So I will just move here to just show you. This maybe it gives a kind of graphic. I don't do very much diagrammatic work, but I think that here you have somehow kind of diagram of what the city could look like after this concept of what will be the elements of a city structure after these observations of the cell and the back of the cell, let's say. So it's somehow a condition that is organized with an infrastructure very similar to a warehouse that has to be also fed with, goods. And then you have these drones that you see that fly to the guy there who is sitting in this chair and somehow has nothing to worry about because somehow everything is organized as a kind of closed system. So then we will have to think what the life in the exterior of the city means, but this was somehow a condition that was locking the idea of the household and the bed, the connected bed, or I don't know, the system of relation to the infrastructure. So in my text, Urban Planning for Murder, I tried to, which is a text that I published only digitally, and it has, it's published in DPR Barcelona, and it's about it's about a text by Badiou, which is called Peut-on penser la politique, a text from 1985, where Badiou was proposing this distinction between fact and event, and it's a kind of very important distinction that I cannot so much deal with today, but already we can say something about it, that from this distinction, I try to organize an idea of the infrastructure that was related to a double phenomenon of damage, detriment, failure, or repair. So this double phenomenon that was not only concerning the culture of the infrastructure, of the malfunction repair, but also the function per se of the infrastructure, that it was related to a kind of institutionalization of repair as a kind of urban characteristic that is per se absolutely important. I always give this example of the source of the water and where everybody goes to get water, and then if the city or community undertakes the distribution of the water in the houses, then we lose this kind of exteriority of the commitment to go every day to this source, but also we get this sharing condition, and we could understand this as a repair because we are not anymore, we do not anymore need to travel to do these steps to go to the source in order to get water. But yes, we can also think about it differently. So, so I think that in every aspect of the infrastructure, we have this idea of repair. So in Thessaloniki from 2009, we did a work with another big team with Philippos Soropoulos, Alexis Dallas, and here Katerina Koutsogani, who also worked a lot with the elements concerning an idea of understanding the city of Thessaloniki as a place where we could address the question of murder as an infrastructure. What an infrastructure of murder would mean in relation to what I was telling you, the repair and the rectification, I don't know, the rectification of the detriment of a malfunction, and understanding the accident of murder as a kind of this type of problem. So we did a research. I'm sorry, I don't know why it repeats itself. Okay, so we enter the morgue. Here are the morgue's refrigerators. There was a kind of architectural way of really making a very elaborated description of 100 murders that happened in the public realm of the city of Thessaloniki, which is also very rich in murders after it became Greek in 1913. And all these are offices of lawyers here from the court, the room where the condemned man goes, or again the morgue, architecture of the court, is murder sites, hospital apparatus for murder, again, a lot of documents describing murders. So we treated all this as a kind of setting that was proposing an idea of urbanism in relation to repairing the murder. Okay, so we wanted to also deal with kind of territorialization of the infrastructure, to find elements that were really absolutely important for a city to get to organize its function. Here, it was the final show happened in the Bar Association of Thessaloniki. We wanted to really emphasize again this this idea of an infrastructure, somehow civic infrastructure for murder. So just to tell you how different all this is to the idea of the city function we are speaking about, and what kind of new phase of infrastructure we are running, what type of intelligent warehouses we could think about in order to understand what is what it can promise. This type of here some drones and the way that and again a very similar model of the city function. So as the simple formula, independently for its relation to the traditional urban setting of the so-called countryside, that we can also skip after this kind of distinction, the existence of a less or more complex courier service, which connects two realms. You can also have a look at Amazon's drones, etc. All these kind of picture are completing an idea about what we could mean as an urbanism of tomorrow, announced as a setting of these two realms and a despotic position describing the urban sphere today. So the rationale of the extended bed operating through a cockpit, somehow a control panel, and what maybe we could say that this is how we could, I did start some remarks about this theory of cockpit. I would like to have more time to speak more about it, but the idea of the domestication of this control panel, that is somehow absolutely important part of organizing not only a technical side of the house, but also a change in scale, we could say, in the city phantasmagoria to what Benjamin was observing in Paris, where we remember that the elements of an exteriorized living room were forming some kind of interior, and where the flaneur was the guy who really tried to stay out of the common sphere in order to absorb this type of walking in the city. How much of an inversion do we have here, where an interior view organizes a missing exterior through substitution? And I will only give a first hint today about what would mean this, what I promised, the theory of cockpit and the theory of the invisible community, but they all somehow serve as a postscript to the two works that I'm revisiting after the pandemics a bit, the House for Doing Nothing and the Urban Protocols. So let's move on. A bit, this is how I normally start presentation of my work. It's this famous fragment of Zizek, which is also very randomly cut from pieces that are totally, sometimes they are not going the same direction. Sometimes he says the opposite thing in many of his texts. He does this kind of, you find the opposite statement in another part of his work. But I wanted very much to emphasize this and organize what we would understand from his work in relation to a concept about apraxia, I don't know how to call it, inoperativity, which is here not related to a task, political element of a political wish. That would be the case of Paul Lafargue, or in the beautiful Fifth Promenade of Rousseau in his Reverie du Promeneur Solitaire, where escape and the space of a desert island in a lake in Switzerland becomes the place of his most valuable memories while he was doing nothing, or a text that was indicated to me by Hamed and Platon of Malevich, aestheticizing inactivity, and Agamben commenting on it. So I think that when in 2008 I found this text of Zizek, I understood him as a contemporary hero of withdrawal, as if it was somehow a literature hero. And he was explaining differently what he meant by this kind of withdrawal. And it was, of course, a bit blurred, but I tried to also make it something like a stronger element for organizing a point of view. And I think that maybe Zizek could be also seen as an analog hero, as Oblomov in Gonjarov's text, in literature text, where, I mean, there is a critique also of the society, or there is a kind of role in the social sphere to be played. And my critique to this argument of Zizek was, here you see that he somehow insists on this idea of the leftist friends. He says, I guess, the Feuerbach, the text of Marx about Feuerbach and the idea of inaction that would go totally opposite from the proposal of Marx, that it's now time for the philosophers to do something and stop thinking. And he said that maybe now it's the opposite. It is time to stop acting and start thinking. And it's a leitmotif that even after the pandemics, Zizek repeated, which was very impressive for me, because even in this situation of a kind of forced element of the same power to put us somehow in this necessary condition of apraxia, he still thought that it is possible to somehow keep thinking in this condition, which is also, we could also say that I think that there is also something in relation to a reading by, yes, let's see, just that you have a look of the house for doing nothing. So it was somehow a work done to organize a house like a studio. So it's like a receiver and a transmitter house. So where everything was in a kind of nonchalance, and somehow it was a poison in a kind of luxury prison that I was trying to captivate in these drawings. And at the same time, in the absolute character of a wish of isolation, where tele-operation was constituting already the social sphere via the very absence of physicality, I thought that maybe we could criticize Zizek also through a kind of reading of the Marx manuscripts of 1844 about alienation, where Marx was writing that a philosopher could be defined as an abstraction. I'm sorry, now I have to translate from Greek, so I hope it's not totally defined. A philosopher defined as an abstraction or a condensation, a crystallization, solidification, I don't know how to call it, of the alienated man. So the philosopher would be self-conceived as the one who plunges the unhomely world. For me, this would mean that for the Marx of the manuscripts, a concrete grasp of alienation or the reversal of alienation coincide with the production of abstract thought. I think that there is also a kind of Hegelianism here, and the history of the unhomely could then be identified to the very theory of theoretical thought. So we could not have thinking without alienation. A valid question in relation to this argument, I think, would be what happens to this rupture with the house, which is equivalent precondition to thought, when it has to be operated inside the house. And if the rupture producing theory is also measured as a contrast between abstract thought and tangible reality, we have this kind of classical distinction, let's say. How does this model is transformed when the house becomes an observatory of an always intangible world or an always pre-represented world? What is the effect of this change that happens in the realm of the cell to thought, let's say? So if we project Marx's reasoning at the present time, we would also already expect a radically different theoretical culture, or a theory totally denerved by its principal tasks. Of course, the less dramatic becomes the contrast between things and their representation, we could say, before the pandemics, the more theory seeks to be configured differently. And so the intellectual obligation that Zizek was asking us to consider as a position for staying back in the domestic space in order to see, in order to be able to see, we had to step back and close the doors. Is very different from the Marxistic, let's say, point of view, and a lot of people following Marx in this sense. Like I know that this kind of maybe radical acceptance of this, and also driven driving this in the limits is politics of in Richard Sennett's book, The Fall of Public Man. Let's say I think it's exactly this classical position that is presented. I was always, in the same time, trying to understand how the model of Zizek was working, but also I was interested to it more than following this conventional rationale of us having to step back to where we were before. I think that it was not possible anymore to think with a world without infrastructure. So I try to go a bit quicker. I was trying to pose the questions of the cockpit as an internalization in the way that we could understand an interiorization of this type of spaces that were somehow organizing bigger moves, but in a way that it was also fitting to a very different life. So even in this house, that was the house of Hydra, that I really constructed, not like this. It's also, this is a kind of distortion of the reality that I always like. But I think that the element of an amphitheater here was undertaking the role of a kind of living room, but while a domestication of a theater was projected. So I thought that maybe the exercise of architecture here in a kind of island that was very close to the city of Athens, I thought that it gave me the idea of working to a touristic concept of the urban self itself, so that not that this was somehow corrupted by the city, but that this was the essence, let's say, that I don't know what to use this strong word, but that the Hydra house, the theater house, would be something like proposing a touristic concept of the urban, new urban cell. And it was always organized as a kind of common sitting place turned to a single observation point, which is a mere wall, obliging always the temporary inhabitants to perform in it without really having a kind of vis-a-vis condition only. Of course, it can happen, but it was a kind of I wanted to get rid of tables to see what this could mean. So I always conceived that as a kind of exercise, but it's very strange that it works also. And this research, I continued with this island of Oswald Spengler, also idealizing a kind of fake understanding of nature and living in a kind of fake scenography. So we did also with Katerina Kuzoyani these models that were somehow shown in the Biennale of Venice, and were showing this type of the landscape seen as diaphragm. It's as a kind of already understandable theater of the natural. Oh my God. Okay. And of course, this has a past also, but also maybe earlier, 2008, where this type of operation was also tested in a desert island, pro-Photoshop era. And I was trying to think what this concrete beds would look like as if they were caves for the infrastructure, where really was absolute disconnection. Also, we were working then with Yannikos Vasiloulis and trying to design the exaggeration of what an infrastructure concept would mean. So all this did, I did think about all this as an understanding of the work that was expanding the idea always of this cell. There's a kind of a cell cut from the infrastructure sphere, but in the same time connected with the way connected with the infrastructure. So it was somehow a kind of fake position where the figures of the inhabitants could be seen as urban hermits operating the rituals of a declined domesticity, settled to underline an hypnotic interest to a new urban phantasmagoria that was this type of small-scale phantasmagoria of the web, where the interface was much more important and prestigious than whatever is not seen as a kind of represented element of the city. And always the connection to the city with these desert cells was driven by this power of trying to understand the landscape of this desert as an analog to what the infrastructure desert would mean. So even in the concept of archipelago, the most important part was a relation that we would see as the archipelago of protocols, the archipelago of the beds, of connected beds, elements that were connected in the sense of creating population of fragments that I always saw that this mapping, the structure of this mapping of populations of fragments were more and more important in the way that one could describe sociality and the structure of it. So, yes, this is the very unstable and invisible connection between all this somehow exotic work and urbanism, but it's very much there. And at last, yes, this model of the Zizek Island that tries to understand again the multiplicity of these cells in a desert, and again to let me stop here a bit. So I have published in German a text that is called Der Name des Magens, and it means the name of the stomach, as a comment to Georgia Agamben's Kingdom and Glory text concerning a post-internet power of the infrastructure and its different theatricality. I don't know if you have read this book of Agamben. It's a nice book, a bit long, but it has a very interesting argument where the constitutional relation of power to a certain empty theatricality is really described amazingly. And the visibility of the ruler and the acceptance of the position of the ruler is shown in a different political theology, I think, that Agamben undertakes to present in this book. And in my text, I try to show that maybe we could locate something like a historical moment of change, where the moment when power or the capital enter the infrastructure and becoming part of it, not to say that they are the rulers of infrastructure, because this is always a problem when one tries to speak about this exterior view of the infrastructure. It's always very difficult. And so I think that we maybe reached a moment where the theatrical acceptance of power And the rituals of accepting power as such, which were described by Agamben as very theatrical rituals, seem to be not so important anymore, that maybe power could find a way to exercise it, to be exercised while hidden. Furthermore, we could say that this power, the hidden power operating via the infrastructure, is better to be described as a negation of the traditional performance of power. And maybe we could here make a statement that relates to this type of understanding power. And I want to close. I think that I have a bit more. I went a bit more with my time. To close this, I'm thinking again on projects that need also more postscripts after the pandemic's experience. So this is another project that yes, tries to understand the moves of these cells. If we could have a kind of mobile understanding of these moves, and where we could also think about elements that could plug into the infrastructure, units that could collect other units or cells to create strange conditions of city-like conditions without having anything to do with what one could enjoy in a kind of city. Of course, I did not find, I always have this kind of double feeling that maybe there is an interest in this type of organization that really accepts somehow the elements of the structure it shows very a naked structure of the social sphere in a way. Community finally in all these projects seems to meet in protocols as we do also now, and many of these communities are produced by a logic of the market, most of them. We are in an exception. And a part of the architectural world may be thinking already about the architecture of this condition, but we could say that this demands new extensions of understanding the field of architecture and collaboration between disciplines in order to propose alternative meeting conditions. I think that I would always work for understanding, trying to organize a better description of the social sphere, to somehow an inventive narrative that could really describe the function of the infrastructure as a key element of the social sphere. But it is certain that the politics of infrastructure could have to deal with distorted concepts, very different sometimes from the ones of traditional political theory. The passage of the infrastructure will also have to put in question many of the certainties of late capitalism. I think that the infrastructure at the same time carries with it an image of a democratic character, but in the form it operates now, it can also be described as a colonizing machine. Any concept of the terrestrial cannot avoid to encounter with infrastructure. And the infrastructure as performed today is also providing a model of governance. It can prove that the stability of the apparatus of human life can be addressed as a merely technical question, but in my eyes and from my point of view, to elaborate differently a territorialized system of parallel works could showcase its presence and deal with radically different strategies for it. So I think that my postscript to all these words is somehow characterized by an idea that there were some elements, some concepts that were ruling all my work, that were the concepts of withdrawal, isolation, immobility, inoperativity, which are today overemphasized and were already with us. And there is a kind of change and an aspect of war that we suddenly find ourselves into with this experience of the infrastructure that we live into and its extensions that we will see soon. Thank you very much, and excuse me, I was a bit long.
Thank you, Aristide. This was great, really inspiring, and really fascinating lecture. I will open the floor to questions. I think maybe you should stop sharing your screen. It would be easier to see faces and also to understand who wants to ask a question. Great. Okay. Are there any questions? I think you can just unmute yourselves.
Hi, Joanna. I didn't see you.
Yes, I said hi earlier, but you were setting up your presentation.
Okay, you were muted. I didn't hear you. Okay.
It's okay. Perhaps I was muted. So, okay, let me start. I mean, it's been a while since I last saw you, so it's nice to see you again.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing your work. It's always very very inspiring and very insightful. I was particularly interested in the concept of theatricality you bring up, and especially in relation to Agamben's reading, which I haven't read, but that's why I wanted to ask you how he posits it within the capitalist framework, because to my understanding, as soon as capital, let's say, emerged and took over, I think it was a big hit to theatricality as a ritual of establishing power. And so it's also interesting to see how you connected with a sense of withdrawal or isolation, so perhaps a kind of theatricality that works without the spectator, or without the audience. So if you could tell us your thoughts.
Yes, thank you for this question. I think, yes, there's a lot to be said about this text of Agamben, and also about his way of entering the Christian literature. Also, I think that maybe the starting point in many of his texts is this idea of economia, the Greek word, that is translated in Latin dispositio. And maybe there is also this classic background of insisting of the change of meaning that happens from the one term to the other. So I think that in Agamben's word, economia means also the disposition of the father and the son, and also he enters to a somehow Weberian, I think, idea of understanding capitalism through religion, and also political theology is absolutely present in all this text. So I think that it's a text itself that is not predictable. He's somehow including all the rituals of repetition in order to show, first of all, the emptiness of the God's figure. So somehow that God is always there in the triad or in the relation to the Son, but he's not occupied with a lot of things. He just permits them while the Son is the manager of the world, and somehow he's the one who takes action. So at one moment, yes, in my text, I tried to bring forward the idea of a name of the stomach, because I was trying to name also the infrastructure realm. And I think that an interesting part of the infrastructure is that it's a bit unnameable. We can only speak about it as a technical mass that we do not understand, as a black box that cannot operate in its own will. Yes, so I was trying in my text to somehow uncover this side of the work of Agamben. So it was also an element, a kind of critical element to his work in relation to this being something like a condition that goes for every power. I thought that maybe we have to read his text very carefully, and also think about the changes in theatricality that happen, be they the changes that we observe in the Nazi powers, let's say, operation, or so in the theology of the political that is much more related to repetition, exclamation, because all these are very important terms, become the terms that are empty of, there is no, they have no content. So power has no content. That is the idea of Agamben that is under it. Somehow it's a contentless schema. I don't know if I answered, but
yes, you did. I mean, religion is definitely a sector where theatricality has prevailed. Yeah. So thanks. If you could just write in the chat the title of Agamben's work.
Yes, it's
yes, thank you.
I will.
Any other questions?
Marcos.
Anyone?
Maybe, I'd like if you could elaborate a little bit more about the instrumentalization of the wonderful drawings and collages and images that you showed as part of the architect's tool. In your case, I think it's very clear the way you use them to problematize, but also to challenge and to propose. Because I find it really interesting and like amazing the way you use them as propositive tools, actually very visual and very direct and powerful as well. So
thank you very much for the question. It's a question that I have answered sometimes, and Pier Vittorio liked very much my answer once. That was that I conceived the drawings as in the same way that terrorists use bombs. But I think, okay, it's I was telling it, I think, in order to say that in the office we sign with this drawing somehow, so it's understandable. So we try to keep the same character of them in order to be understood that we are the same terrorist group, let's say. But I think that the instrumentalization that you ask for, yes, I think that it's very difficult to operate without a kind of image in the reality of today. And also I have from my experience, this does not mean never that this the way that we treat image, at least, it does not lock a meaning inside it. So what is also interesting, I think, is this kind of constant revisit of the imagery, and also the creation of new narrative paths inside the same elements, or extension with new drawings that also show a different type of understanding the same concept that is caught by an image. Yes, in what concerns its practicality, it's a mode of operation of my practice, let's say. So I think that we always find a kind of element to draw, and then there is a whole set of decisions to choose some points of view, and then we throw away a lot, but yes, it's a kind of process that it's painful also. It takes a lot of time. And yes, I was also asked a lot about the black and white thing. It's also because we don't have so much luxury to work with color. It's much more demanding in terms of, it was proved that I cannot, if we start an image that is colorful, I have to have the double or the triple time to organize it. And we go normally with no renderings. It's only kind of 3D drawing that is elementary that we do, and we solve the building together with while we create the images, and it's somehow, if there is a building. And so it's yes, what you ask about the instrumentalization, it's absolute use of the rhetorics of the office, and yes, I cannot think about the practice without the images. It's very difficult to understand how it would look like, how the rationality of it would be organized. There is this element when you deal with theory that you may have to conclude some concepts, and this is when I have a conclusion, as was the case with the reading of the text of Badiou that I was telling you, and the text of Agamben. When I have something to be written, I know that I have to use this writing apparatus and finish what I do there. But when the things are more complicated, I think that it's, for me, it's very depressing to see that we can do nothing and leave it like this. So I always enter the fields of architecture when there is a problem that seems really not solvable, that really seems difficult to solve. Yes, I don't know if this was an answer.
Yes, thank you very much. Just your answer made me think of a follow-up question, which is, in which moment, just like very short, because I don't want to, in which moment of the process do you start drawing in relation to when you start like thinking the project or writing about it? Like, is this something carried out in parallel, or does design come like somewhere at the end?
Yes, it's a very, very important question. It goes together with what I was telling you about the re-elaboration of new concepts that arrive, new narratives that are produced. And this means that maybe we can start an image just, or a project just by, some, I don't want to say intuition, because it goes very much to a classical way of understanding, something like inspiration. I don't like this, but there are some things that really call for an interpretation that could be architectural or visual, and we could immediately deal with them and see then how they could grow, how they could. So the less I do is that I really have an idea about what something is meaning from the beginning. And I think that if I know something like this, I tell you, I really write a text. And it is an interesting process that has to do with a first aporia in front of a very difficult question that normally introduces me in a realm of architecture. And this is why also I cannot build so much, because it's difficult to find people who are interested in such processes. But it is a question of really coming back and forth to the place of the design and the slow concretization of a theoretical text that goes together with the design. So somehow it's a parallel work that happens, and it has kind of dialogue. It's not that I finish with a statement and then I produce. It's the opposite. It's I try to to sabotage the statement when I enter the architectural field.
Thank you.
In order to open the horizon of possible questions, let's say.
This sounds like a terrorist wearing the jacket, not throwing the bomb.
Okay, maybe.
Okay, any other questions?
But there is enough poison, Joanna, in this.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah, I would like to make a question. Can
Sure,
you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Hello, Aristide.
Hi, Arne.
Nice to see you. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask, like, if we take into consideration that nowadays, due to the pandemic, the condition of being together is only through the web. So I was thinking that the contemporary version of withdrawal is when someone is being offline, actually. And I was thinking if you elaborated on that within your work.
Yes, of course, we have done things with this kind of romantic aspect of being cut from the network. I think we did it in this Oswald Spengler island that I was showing you, the first one was with the players. Yes, we meant it as a kind of option that is deliberate and it's always there, but it's proof that it doesn't happen so much. So I think that it's also this type of withdrawal, you say, has also the quality of a very different type of creating a hermit. It's somehow it's a figure that has this nostalgic view of things, and he or she wants to somehow be out of the condition of the whole infrastructure system, let's say. How can we call it? So for me, it is very interesting to do things there, but I think that it's always creating islands that are not always they don't have this power of poison, let's say, that one could use with architecture. So at least I haven't concluded to any very interesting design that would really show a kind of radical criticism, or that it would annoy the infrastructure in this way. I think that the infrastructure tolerates very much this position somehow. So that's why I don't use it so much, but we all like it, and somehow we still understand, vacations, let's say, real vacations. We think that it's something like a cut from the infrastructure, of course. But when was your last moment in this sphere? I don't know. It's somehow as if we negate the sphere itself where we are into. And it doesn't propose a simple solution also. It's, maybe you can read Hakim Bey on this temporary autonomous zones. I don't know, this type of cutting from the continuity of the networks, let's say, and creating something like an isolated. Maybe it's also a possible start, but I think that it has to be my idea, and also Thanos Artaloudis was very radical into our discussions on this. We think together that there is a kind of parallel way to act in this in relation to this machinic scheme. I don't know how to call it. Our quest in all the works were to operate in parallel and maybe somehow hack a bit the system and maybe hack a bit more and maybe be allowed, because also this infrastructure does not allow a lot of I think that after Web 2 the infrastructure took a phase, I don't know how to call it, to put it in English, that is going also to a destruction of what was in the past welfare infrastructure of commons, and it bankrupted all this. It keeps bankrupting all these, let's say, public parts of it to replace them with many different alternatives that are private. So somehow it's a difficult machine, a difficult animal to deal with, and proposing social protocols it's very difficult. But we tried with Thanos to make the most possible so that they could function even with very few energy, and I mean with few people and few resources. So yes, that's maybe our contribution to the question, but it's a big one, Artemis. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I wish.
Christina.
Ask. Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. Also related with the question that Raul also did, and this idea of also the bomb and the process that you were mentioning, I was thinking that if in this kind of transition from more theoretical frameworks to the more built infrastructures, as just the theater house that you mentioned, I was also curious about the process itself, but probably this could be a really long question to know more about the narratives that are also related with the practice itself and how this materialized. But I wanted to ask more about if in a kind of build infrastructure or build project, the use, so this how the protocols of use are in a way cross with the protocols that you in a way imagine, and how you, if in a way you are also writing again, analyzing or looking how the infrastructure is used. I'm in a way interested in this relationship between the user and your approach of you in a way if you are connected with this use, and this is affecting also the way you think with new infrastructures. I don't know. I'm just in this thinking how you approach this post-user phase.
Yes, thank you, Christina. Maybe the question is the post-user phase is a very interesting opening of the question. My answer in relation to the theater house is not so, it was a random chance that I had. Also, I was a bit hesitant into entering to architecture. It was a kind of condition that was a family house asked by me. So I could operate with it and also think in all the extents, in the freedom that I would wish, whatever I would do. So it was a kind of open card, how do you say, it's a kind of white card to do something, and it's a rare condition. So I say from the beginning that this is difficult to happen. Somehow it's not something that, of course, now I have some very interesting friends who want to do things and ask me to work together. So if you elaborate a kind of language, maybe you will have what you ask in relation to a kind of freedom for crystallizing things into an architectural way, but also in relation to what you absolutely want to do. And because I think that it will be difficult for any client to accept this. So about the post-user architecture, I think that there is an answer that I always give in the studios, because there are a lot of questions with the crazy things that we do in the studios that all the jurors, when they come, they say, but for who is this? Who is the? So I have concluded to give the same answer to all of these questions. And the answer is that there is, in the infrastructure, there is somehow a condition of openness that is not, it's interesting. That is interesting. For instance, I always tell the same example of a kind of very stupid and very also, from the mainstream capitalist logic, use of the roller in the streets. Okay, so but when there is such a protocol that is somehow positioned in the street, there is always a kind of reaction expected. So with the post-user condition, as you say, I think that is related to this, that it's an open question. So I don't know if you have used ever this roller, I do a lot, and they ask at the end, why did you use the roller? Because they don't know at all why, or they have 3 or 4 very different options that you put. I'm a tourist, I want to rush to go to my work, etc. So I think that this includes a kind of thought about architecture that has to do with, again, the idea of short time renting, and that is somehow coming in a very strong way towards our direction, that somehow we would have to play test architecture, not to follow the directions of a certain user, but that we will have to play test, check, and then maybe again come back and correct. So I think that even in the logic of late capitalism, this is happening very more and more as a kind of effect. So you can also see with Airbnb, if you go and to see which are the most accepted things in this condition of choosing a room in the Airbnb, let's say before pandemics, of course, but you will see that there are very strange houses that are there as a kind of examples. These give more freedom into a kind of experimental architecture, but of course it also makes it less strong as something, because it has to be also, operated in the totality of strange and stupid things that happen in parallel. But you can, I think, try at least. So it's sometimes it's liberating. I don't know if this is a good answer for you, but
thank you very much.
Aristide, I have a twofold question, which might be a bit complicated to answer. But knowing you and knowing the work for many years now, I think I feel that I can ask this question, right? Which is,
you make a lot of introduction and I'm trembling. What?
Okay, it's a twofold question. So, what's the difference between a voluntary withdrawal versus one that is forced upon you? And the second, let's say, sub question is, what's the difference in the protocol between the house of doing nothing and the house for doing everything? And I'm saying this because I think there is a difference in the project between the idea of being away or removed from infrastructure or connected in a kind of voluntary basis versus one that is now forced upon necessity or other parameters today, which is we are in isolation, but always the house or the space that we are occupying is colonized by everything, to the extent of becoming a nightmare space of impossibility of withdrawal. So the protocol there is, I think I can see it in the work very well, but I just, it's a call for you to clarify these differences.
It's not so easy. I don't see it so easily, but of course, first of all, about voluntary and forced. I think this is maybe the clever part of the infrastructure, because it gives this impression of freedom through a radical positioning of alternatives. So somehow, if you don't want this, you can have the other, you have another, but you still have a selection between existing things. So you have to draw back to something pre-existing. So I think that your question, which is a very interesting question, I think has to do with also the concept of freedom that we are dealing with in the infrastructure. It reminds me the Kierkegaard's work, Either Or, I think in English, which is, this description of ambivalence as being finally only a new despotic imposition of a setting. So if you have only to choose from the given, you are somehow you have to accept the existing as is. So immediately I would say that again, the problem is that we do not feel so much forced when we are in the operating the internet, let's say, or in the web. It's multi-functional. It has so many layers and so many escape routes, I don't know how to call it, that it somehow hides the incarceration part in it. So we do not think that we are 20, I mean, not 20, but we are so many hours in the realm of this kind of strange position in relation to an archive. Let's say it's very strange. We are somehow in a warehouse, where humans in a warehouse, let's say. So I think that this is deliberate because we are trapped in a way, you can say, but how can you go back to this? I mean, and how could you correct it, or how you would make it interesting? It's very difficult to answer. And being forced is not the way that infrastructure works, this type of infrastructure. It works as if you have a free choice. You can turn it off if you want. But finally you don't. You have always another window waiting for you. And it's a great movie, or it's a kind of thing. So you are keeping feeding it in a way. This for the voluntary and forced, which is somehow a hybrid that we envisage also. I think that the idea of freedom is always related to a kind of exit from something. I think we understand freedom when we are incarcerated. This is the concept of freedom. It's then that freedom becomes what can be. What it can be. The definition of it becomes strong and understandable. So that's why also I say that the best thing we can do is to describe. I think that describing is very important. If we can conclude with description, it's also a very big creation of where we are thrown into, in a way. But I also am totally in all these machines. So I think that I try to think about it while I'm paralyzed by its effects. Yes, and for the house of doing that, there is a text by an Italian, I think, sorry, a text about an Italian writer, I think, about the house of Hydra as the house for doing everything, where I don't know, he has some arguments. But for me, yes, again, doing nothing means, it never means something absolute. There is a negation of something, again, that is understandable. And that's why I did, if you remember, this collection of heroes of doing nothing in literature and philosophy. So there is so much difference between them. It's they are all so different, and their doing nothing is a different action in a way. So, but if we want to give a serious answer and not escape with this argument that I tell you, I will say that designing the protocols maybe would be a kind of easy way to organize a kind of doing things in this condition. So I think that the passivity that we are driven into without knowing, you see also that the people who have designed big platforms, they're counted in hundreds or sometimes more. They lose the script that they write in order to operate in this field. It's a kind of, it reminds me the Egyptian times. I think that the scripting of the internet has a lot to do with this mystic understanding of writing. We cannot deal with it. We cannot deal with it. We don't know how to read. We have to arrive to, understanding in order to arrive to an understanding of the script that would be, let's say, easy to access for us, we will need a different alphabet for this infrastructure, the way it functions. Now it's hieroglyphic for me, and I think for a lot of us. So there is a dark age that is prolonged with this. I think maybe this will give an option of doing things in the infrastructure in a different understanding, at least action in a different way than now. I don't know.
Great. Thank you. If there are no other questions, I think that's a nice way to conclude Aristide's lecture. I don't know if there are any other questions by anyone. No.
Will you be posting this?
Yes, of
course. Will you
course.
be putting this onto a website?
Yes, we will post it.
And I really am interested in this presentation.
Great. We will. A public program will post it on AA's YouTube channel in the next couple of days. Maybe there will be a delay because of the holiday break, but definitely, by beginning of January it will be online. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Aristide, for this wonderful lecture and presentation, and hope to see you all very soon.